Good evening, folks, and welcome to update number 2 for the 24th of February 2013. This one deals specifically with Tropical Cyclone Rusty. Now, Tropical Cyclone Rusty has developed and been named today, just after lunchtime today. And look, folks, I guess there's an interesting and concerning aspect to the forecast for Rusty, because some of the model guidance is now doing something that it wasn't doing before, and it keeps the cyclone just off the coast and rapidly intensifies it, while still directing strong gale force, storm force, hurricane force winds on the coastline for an extended period of time. Now, we're going to talk about that modelling and why it might be doing that shortly, but suffice to say, things are not as clear-cut, let's say, as they were, say, 24 hours ago, when we just expected the system to push south-southeast and cross the coast. Nowhere near as clear-cut as that, based on today's guidance from this morning and from this afternoon and from even last night. So we've seen a big fundamental shift, and we need to talk about that in more detail. Just off topic a little bit, Oz Cyclone Chasers, we've managed to release our iPhone app, so that's available in the iTunes store now. So if you go to the iTunes store, search for Oz Cyclone Chasers, and you'll be able to download our app. It's $1.99, goes a long way to supporting us, goes a long way to making sure that should a tropical cyclone like this happen again, we will be able to afford to get out there and document it, regardless of whether we can get business sponsorship or not. Alright, folks, let's get into this. Latest shortwave infrared imagery, we can start to make out the tropical cyclone here, and we're starting to make out the spiral banding associated with the system. It certainly hasn't got an eye just yet, but you can definitely see some really good convective banding here coming on the north. Look, people in Broome have been talking to us today, telling us that they've had a lot of rain and have enjoyed the rain. That's all part of the convective banding coming through into the system, wrapping around, and our centre of circulation in here somewhere. But as I say, not quite a defined eye yet. It has been named a tropical cyclone though. Our latest visible imagery, once again, we can sort of start to make out the banding coming into the centre of the system here to the north of Port Hedland. Very, very difficult to discern a circulation centre on that, but overall we would suggest that the circulation centre is right here. We've got a lot of convective activity to the northwest, a lot of convective activity to the southeast. Look, there's a lot of convection. That's pretty normal for this time of development. When a cyclone's really raggedy and weak, as this one is, it tends to be very spread out. Once this cyclone tightens up over the next 24 to 36 hours, you'll start to see this signature really tighten up, and that banding will get a lot tighter and a lot more defined. This image shows us how much moisture is in the atmosphere, and if we get anything more than about a red colouring, shows a very moist atmospheric profile. And cyclones to form, develop and maintain themselves need the red colouring or the purple colouring or even the black colouring here. So you can see that the cyclone itself is now located in a very, very moist area. The other thing that cyclones need is very little wind shear. So let's have a look at what the wind shear values are. If we take a look at the region-wide wind shear values, we can see that as the system heads closer to the coast, it's going to encounter less wind shear. So at the moment, the system's located a fair way north of Port Hedland, and it's located in moderate 10 to 20 knots of wind shear. It's going to head towards the south, towards this area of very, very weak wind shear. It's also going to head into this area of an upper anticyclone, and that upper anticyclone is going to allow it to get rid of the waste products at the top of the thunderstorms, So it's going to allow them to escape both in that direction and out here in that direction. When that starts to happen, we should see rapid intensification. If the storms at the top are able to escape, the waste products from the storms at the top are able to escape, just like we made that muffler analogy a couple of days ago. Similar concept here. If the storms are allowed to escape, we get a much more efficient system from the surface all the way to the top that is able to produce stronger storms continuously. Alright, so that's wind shear, and if we now have a look at the steering flow for this particular system, and we see that overall the system is being steered in a southeast or south-southeast direction. Now we're not too worried about where these arrows are going out here. What we want to see is what these surrounding environmental arrows do. Now you can see here we're expecting it to push in a southeast or even sort of south-southeast direction, but also the environmental arrows are showing us that as the system heads a little bit further to the south, the chances are that it might adopt a bit more of a south to southwest movement as it heads closer to the coastline. Now that's the surrounding environmental flow that's not affected by the actual circulation of the system. So at the moment we're expecting a southeast or south-southeast movement, followed by a south to southwest movement as it approaches the coastline. Now here's where models differ. And this is what makes the track forecast very difficult, because we have two models here. The UK Met, which is the second most accurate in the world, it doesn't want to have a bar of that south to southwest movement. It wants to keep the system moving southeast, whacking into Sandfire Roadhouse. Very clear guidance on that. The CMC also pretty clearly doesn't want to have a bar of the south to southwest movement. Wants to keep pushing it to the southeast, crosses the coast around Pardue. The No Gaps model wants to push it due south. Now that's probably unlikely to happen. Due south from there just has it going straight south. Very unlikely to happen. Now here's where it gets interesting. The GFS. The GFS pushes it a little bit too far to the west, we think, but it pushes it out to the south. And then pushes it directly west off the coastline and hangs off the coastline and then crosses the coast between Karratha and Onslow. As I say, that solution appears to be a little bit too far to the west to be a viable solution. And then we've got the European, and the European pushes it southeast, then south, and then holds it off the coast, and then pushes it back to the west before hitting the coast. So to the west of Headland, between Headland and Karratha. So look, we've got a lot of divergence here in the model guidance. Overall, we know that it's probably going to push southeast in the meantime, or south-southeast in the meantime. But what it does, as it approaches the coast, becomes very complex. So let's have a look at some of the guidance in more detail as to why and how it becomes so complex. Okay, so this is the very latest run from the GFS model, the American model. It comes in at about number 3 in terms of accuracy in worldwide global computer models. And we have a look tonight. It's a tropical cyclone, but only just. We've got 35 to 40 knot winds to its north and south. And if we have a look at what happens by tomorrow morning, the system rapidly intensifies and pushes southeast or south-southeast. By tomorrow night, the system continues to intensify into a category 2, possibly even a 3 by tomorrow night, and continues to stay just to the north or to the north of Headland, but has now slowed in its movement. As we head towards Tuesday morning, we continue to see a gradual southward track, and possibly now by this stage Cat 3 type system. As we head towards Tuesday evening and Tuesday night, we then see the system stall. Now this is the key moment. Tuesday night, both the European and the GFS models do exactly the same thing with this system. They stall it just off the coast. So everything seems to go to plan, and then boom, it just stops. And this is what we've got to investigate further. Why does it stop, and why does it stop there just off the coast? Because if it stops once it's crossed land, no problems. Alright, yes, it's going to cause a lot of wind, a lot of rain, possibly a storm surge, but it's not going to cause the disastrous conditions you're going to see here. So we need to understand why it's stopping the system just off the coast. Now, if we continue on with this forecast model projection, we'll just zoom in a little bit to make it a little bit clearer, and we'll overlay some place names, which will hopefully clear it up a little bit more. So there's Broome, there's Headland, Karratha out here. Now, if we head towards Wednesday morning, we see that for 6 hours the system has not moved, and it's just off the coast of Port Hedland. And then by Wednesday 10 a.m. Queensland time, 8 a.m. Look, it's just not moving, folks. It's a category 3 or 4 tropical cyclone, and it's just sitting off the coast and getting stronger. And that's the key here. It's getting stronger as it sits off the coast in those really warm waters off the Pilbara coastline. Now, as we head towards Wednesday afternoon, still no movement in the system. So 24 hours of no movement. It's just sitting there off the coast of Headland. And then as we head towards Wednesday night, finally it starts to make its approach towards Port Hedland in a southeast direction or south-southeast direction again. And by Thursday, the overnight to early morning Thursday, but look folks, it's still very, very slow. This is Thursday morning 5 a.m. Western time. It's just making landfall now to the west of Headland. It's a really concerning situation because because of the amount of time this thing just spends off the coast, just ramping up in intensity. You can see here 950 to 960 hectopascals as it crosses, which is a Cat 4, solid Cat 4 type system. So that's the GFS system, the GFS model. The European is even more concerning. Let me show you that one. Okay, so here's the Euro model, and as per standard GFS, we're seeing the system out here, a weak cyclone, but a cyclone nonetheless, and it's pushing towards the south or south-southeast over the course of the next few hours, to 24 to 36 hours probably. So it all seems to be going to plan. So it all seems to be going to plan for a sort of Pardue to Sandfire Roadhouse type crossing in the desolate areas where it won't really affect too many people. And here's what happens as we head in towards Tuesday. You can see here getting very close to the coast. Only about 150 k's off the coast Tuesday morning. And guess what happens around about Tuesday lunchtime? That stall, the same stall you saw happening in the GFS model, is happening in the European model too. And as it stalls just off the coastline, it just sits there, pushes a little bit to the west or the southwest, still just off the coastline. As we head to Tuesday night, it's still just hanging off the coastline, pushing a little bit to the west here, getting stronger as it does it. You can see here, look at the wind barbs here, 75 knots, and these winds are just constantly hammering Headland, hammering the coast. We're not sure if it's going to be Headland, just constantly hammering the coast. And once again, we're still at Wednesday 10 a.m, still doing nothing, still just sitting just off the coast, and then bang, finally it decides to push to the south and whack into the coast sometime Wednesday night. In the meantime, if you have a look at how many lots of 3-hour periods, each one of these is a 3-hour period that I'm going through. You can see here Headland's in the purple here for 3 hours, 6 hours, 9 hours, 12 hours, 15 hours, 18 hours, 21 hours, 24 hours, 27, 30, 33, 36 hours, folks. 36 hours of destructive or very destructive winds over Port Hedland, or over any part of the coastline that this decides to do the stall in. It's very, very important, if it does this stall, whether it can do it just off the coast there, or whether it can do it once it's crossed land. So if it decides to stall, if it crosses land, it's not going to be anywhere near as intense. If it does this is a disastrous scenario. And just to give you an example of how much the European is ramping up its intensity, if we zoom right into the system here, it's about 940 hectopascals on Wednesday morning, and as it crosses the coast, between 910 to 920 hectopascals as a Category 5. So it's really probably the worst case scenario, and adult cyclone chasers, we don't wish the worst case scenario on anyone, but if this happened, it would be the worst case scenario. Let's have a look at what the Ensemble suggests. Is this model alone in its thinking, or does it have a fair bit of guidance to help support it with this stall scenario? So 24 hours time, folks, we've got pretty good model agreement here, shown by the lack of different colouring. So in 24 hours we expect this cyclone to be in that location. Very little model disagreement there, very high confidence in that track for 24 hours. At the 48-hour mark, we start to lose a bit of confidence in the track forecast, because we start to see models either going towards the southeast, as we saw the UK Met, and as we saw the CMC crossing the coast between Pardue and Sandfire. That's still an option, and still an option that some of the European model members are going with. But we also see that other option that I showed you in the deterministic chart, that has the system still off the coast and very slow moving. So we've got two options here at the 48-hour mark by Tuesday. So we could be seeing the system approaching the Pilbara coastline around that Pardue to, as I say, Sandfire, or we could be seeing the system almost stationary just off Port Hedland by Tuesday afternoon. Wednesday morning. Now, Wednesday morning's interesting. Look, if the system has crossed the coast, the model members are suggesting that it's going to continue pushing in a southeast direction and will be captured by an upper trough. We'll talk about the upper level shortly. If the system remains off the coast, it's going to then escape the upper level trough. So if the system by Wednesday morning is still off the coast, it's going to sit here for a bit. And this is the concerning part that I just showed you. The system sits here and just deepens and deepens and deepens in the very, very warm sea surface temperatures off the northwest part of WA. And by Thursday morning, we see considerable model disagreement. A lot of model disagreement here by Thursday morning, where it could still be off the coast. Overall, the model consensus is that it's still just lying off the coast of Karratha. But in that, we've got an error margin that says it could have already crossed around Pardue or Sandfire, pushing now to the southeast rapidly, or it could still be well off the coast to the north of Karratha, or it could have already been around Hedland. Look, folks, by Thursday, way too much disagreement to even speculate because of what happens in the upper levels. It's a very complex pattern. Once again, I said we'll talk about it, we will, but let's have a look at the GFS Ensemble first. Same thing with the GFS Ensemble. We've got a very high confidence in their track forecast. The system's going to be lying off the Pilbara coastline tomorrow at 2 p.m. Western time. Still seeing a fairly high degree of confidence that the system continues to approach the Pilbara coastline just to the north of Port Hedland, or just to the north of Pardue at that point in time, Tuesday afternoon, as a significant tropical cyclone, likely to be a Cat 2 or 3 at that point in time. Unfortunately, folks, this model is nowhere near clear enough to give us any guidance whatsoever as to whether this storm is going to happen. Overall, we're expecting the system to be lying just off the coast or just on the coast by Wednesday afternoon, around Port Hedland, just to the east of it. But once again, we see a lot of error margin here by the Wednesday period. So it could have already pushed inland near Pardue or towards Sandfire. Could have pushed inland already, or it could still be hanging off the coast here in a stall pattern, just like we saw with the GFS and European deterministic runs. So a lot of model disagreement by Wednesday afternoon. By Thursday afternoon, it should be inland. Most of the model guidance here suggests it's inland, and most of the guidance is favouring either a southeast push with regards to an upper trough capturing it, or just a general meandering to the south once it crosses the coast. So, folks, that's where the models are. Now let's have a look at why they're showing what they're showing. Okay, so this is now looking at the upper levels of the atmosphere, the 500 hectopascal region, so about 5 kilometres above the surface of the Earth. Now, when we see the lines jutting up to the north, we see what we call an upper level trough shown in these charts. So we've got this line here just jutting up to the north a little bit, just enough to touch this system and push it in a south-southeast direction. Not enough to shear it away, but just enough to push it in this direction and to try to intensify it a little bit by creating an outflow channel. We've already talked about that. Now, same thing on Tuesday. Now, if you notice, that line has now gone right up here to the north and actually captured the cyclone, and it's actually now very, very high confidence that it's going to be pushing it in that direction on Tuesday morning. So, as I say, the track forecast for the next 2 days, pretty high confidence that this is going to happen, because both of these global models and all their ensemble members are saying exactly the same thing for the next couple of days. So fairly high confidence it's going to either push in a southeast or south-southeast direction over the next, or even maybe southerly direction over the next 24 to 48 hours. So very high degree of confidence in that. Where it gets shaky is what happens next. So by Wednesday morning, what happens and why this becomes such an interesting pattern is because this upper level trough is now pushed very, very quickly eastwards. So no longer is it having that effect of pushing the system in the south-southeast direction that it has been over the last 2 days. However, that's where the modelling differs. See, some of the models continue to push this upper trough further out here to the west and therefore still maintain a grip on the cyclone. Now, assuming that this is correct, assuming that overall the ensemble, and this is what the ensemble overall is showing, we then have a high pressure ridge building in here at the 500 hectopascal level. Now, a high pressure in here at the 5 kilometers above the atmosphere level will try to push a cyclone in that direction. Okay, it will try to push it towards the southwest or west-southwest. Now, this ridge developing in here is very, very weak. And because it's going to be very, very weak, it's not really going to push it straight off the coast way out here past Exmouth. It's going to just stop its movement or slow its movement down and possibly just drift it a little bit to the west. Now, once again, this is so varied because some of the models in this group of models do not even show this happening. So overall, this is what we expect. But there are different models in this group that suggest that this won't even happen and the system will continue tracking in a southeast direction. So there's a lot of model disagreement once we get out past 48 hours. Once we get into Wednesday, the situation becomes extremely complex with a lot of different members in play, a lot of different systems in play. We're going to have an upper ridge and an upper trough, and those two are going to fight it out for which one is going to maintain control of this system. If the upper trough wins, the system pushes southeast and hopefully will hit the coast east of Port Hedland. If the ridge starts to win out, the system will stop its movement or slow its movement down and then push towards the west slightly before the ridge breaks down again and we get a southerly movement. Now, as I say, a lot of disagreement. We're not going to speculate past Wednesday as to what will happen. But all I'd like you to understand is while the Bureau of Meteorology's track right now shows the system pushing southeast pretty confidently, the confidence drops a lot once we get out past the 2.5 day period. So hopefully with any luck, if it does do the stall, it stalls inland of the coast. The other interesting thing that the Bureau says about this system is that the size and the actual speed of its movement, that's what they call the translation speed, is just the speed of its movement, is likely to lead to larger than usual rainfall amounts, and the model guidance is in line with this, leading to concerns of major flooding in the De Grey River catchment. Significant flooding also likely in the Fortescue and Pilbara coastal streams. So flooding is something that we haven't talked about that is certainly an issue with this system just because of its slow movement. And finally, here's what they say about this guidance that I was talking to you about. Model guidance still shows some spread, but amongst the models that intensify the system, there is better agreement. A track just to the west of Port Hedland is possible, but the consensus track has consistently been to the east of Port Hedland. A track to the west of Port Hedland would lead to concerns of a major storm surge in that area. So at this stage, as the Bureau shows in their track map, and let's have a quick look at that before we finish, we see a consistent track to the south-southeast. Now remember, if the stall happens, it's likely to happen around about the end of this forecast track. If that does happen, we're going to see huge amounts of rainfall. We're going to see prolonged periods of destructive force winds in the Port Hedland region, and we could even see a track further towards the west before finally making landfall between Hedland and Karratha. So very, very interesting situation happening. Now, if you notice also, Broome has been included in the cyclone warning. Probably not so much because the cyclone's going to head that way, but the gale radius, particularly to its north, is going to be very extensive. And so even if the system crosses around Wallal, Broome is likely to get gales from the system. Even if it crosses towards Pardue, Broome is still likely to get gales from the system just because of the very intense monsoonal flow around it to its north. Alright folks, very interesting pattern happening, very interesting situation happening probably around about Wednesday morning. We might know a bit more about whether this stall is still going to happen. Hopefully the guidance comes into line tomorrow and we can have a better idea of whether the stall is going to happen. We really won't know until Wednesday morning. So for now, if you live anywhere Karratha eastwards, stay safe and make sure your cyclone kits are completely prepped. Thanks for watching. Talk to you again tomorrow.